Captain Marcus Blackwood stood at attention outside the grand oak doors of the throne room, his polished armor gleaming under the crystal chandeliers of Eldermore Palace. 23 years of faithful service to the crown had earned him the position of head of the royal guard, a role he cherished above all else. His weathered hands gripped the ceremonial sword at his side, a gift from King Edmund himself on his 20th year of service. The autumn wind rattled the tall windows of the ancient castle, carrying with it the scent of dying leaves and the promise of winter. Marcus had always found comfort in the changing seasons at Eldermore, each one bringing its own rhythm to palace life. But today, something felt different. There was an undercurrent of tension that seemed to permeate the very stones of the castle walls. Queen Isabella swept past him in a rustle of emerald silk, her golden hair arranged in an elaborate style that spoke of hours spent in preparation. She barely acknowledged his respectful bow, her green eyes fixed on something beyond his shoulder. Marcus had served 3 generations of the royal family, and he had learned to read the subtle signs of palace intrigue. The queen's hurried pace and the tight set of her jaw told him that all was not well in the kingdom of Eldermore. "Captain Blackwood," came a voice from behind him. Marcus turned to see Sir Thomas Whitmore, the Queen's personal advisor, approaching with his characteristic measured steps. Whitmore was a thin man with sharp features and calculating eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He had arrived at court 5 years ago, quickly rising in the Queen's favor through a combination of charm and cunning that Marcus found unsettling. "Sir Thomas," Marcus replied with a formal nod. The Queen seemed rather urgent in her movements just now. Whitmore's lips curved into what might have been a smile, though it never reached his eyes. "Her Majesty has many pressing matters on her mind these days. The kingdom faces challenges that require decisive action." He paused, studying Marcus carefully. "I trust we can count on your absolute loyalty, Captain. These are delicate times." The words carried an undertone that made Marcus's instincts prickle with unease. In his years of service, he had learned to distinguish between genuine concern for the realm and something more sinister. "My loyalty has always been to the crown and the people of Eldermore, Sir Thomas. That has never wavered." "Of course," Whitmore said smoothly, "though I wonder if you truly understand what loyalty means in practice. Sometimes, Captain, loyalty requires us to overlook certain irregularities for the greater good." Before Marcus could respond, the throne room doors swung open, and King Edmund emerged. At 62, the king still carried himself with dignity, though Marcus noticed the increasing stoop to his shoulders and the way his hand trembled slightly as he gripped his walking stick. The king's once vibrant brown hair had turned completely gray, and deep lines etched his face, speaking of the weight of years spent governing a troubled kingdom. "Marcus, my faithful friend," King Edmund said, his voice warm despite its growing frailty. "Walk with me to the gardens. I find myself in need of fresh air and honest conversation." Marcus fell into step beside his sovereign, leaving Sir Thomas behind in the corridor. They walked in comfortable silence through the palace halls, past portraits of long-dead monarchs and tapestries depicting great battles of ages past. The king moved slowly, his breathing labored, and Marcus found himself unconsciously adjusting his pace to match. The royal gardens were a masterpiece of landscaping, with perfectly manicured hedges forming intricate patterns around fountains and flower beds. Even in autumn, the gardens maintained their beauty, though the flowers had given way to the rich golds and crimsons of the season. King Edmund settled onto a stone bench beside a fountain depicting the kingdom's patron saint, and Marcus remained standing at attention. "Sit, Marcus," the king said gently. "We are old friends, are we not? There is no need for such formality when we are alone." Marcus lowered himself onto the bench, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "Your Majesty honors me with his friendship." King Edmund was quiet for a long moment, watching the water cascade from the fountain. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with weariness. "I fear I am not the king I once was, Marcus. Age creeps upon a man like fog, slowly obscuring the clarity of youth. I find myself questioning decisions I once would have made without hesitation. You have ruled with wisdom and compassion for 37 years, Your Majesty. The people love you." "Do they?" the king asked, his eyes meeting Marcus's with startling intensity. "I sometimes wonder if they see only what they are told to see. Isabella assures me that our policies are popular, that the kingdom prospers under our rule. Yet I hear whispers in the corridors, Marcus." whispers of discontent, of suffering in the outer provinces. Marcus chose his words carefully. As head of the royal guard, he had access to reports from across the kingdom that painted a different picture than the one presented in official court briefings. The kingdom faces challenges, Your Majesty. The harvest was poor in the northern provinces, and the new taxes have been difficult for some to bear. The king's expression darkened. New taxes? I approved no new taxes, Marcus. The royal treasury remains adequate for the kingdom's needs. A chill ran down Marcus's spine. He had seen the tax collectors throughout the realm, bearing official seals and demanding payment in the king's name. If King Edmund had not authorized these levies, then someone was acting without royal approval, collecting funds for purposes unknown. Perhaps there has been some miscommunication, Marcus said diplomatically. Sir Thomas mentioned that the Queen has been managing many of the kingdom's affairs to spare Your Majesty unnecessary burden. King Edmund's face grew troubled. Isabella has indeed taken on additional responsibilities. She claims it is to preserve my health, to allow me to focus on the larger matters of state. But I begin to wonder if I have allowed too much authority to pass from my hands. The conversation was interrupted by the approach of a young page who bowed deeply before speaking. Your Majesty, the Queen requests your immediate presence in the council chamber. She says there is urgent news from the border provinces. King Edmund sighed heavily and rose from the bench, leaning heavily on his walking stick. It seems my moment of peace is at an end. Thank you for the conversation, Marcus. Your honesty refreshes me in these troubled times. As the king departed with the page, Marcus remained in the garden, his mind racing with implications. The unauthorized taxes, the Queen's increasing control over kingdom affairs, Sir Thomas's veiled threats about loyalty. Pieces of a larger puzzle were beginning to form in his mind, and the picture they painted filled him with growing alarm. That evening, Marcus made his usual rounds through the palace, checking on the guard posts and ensuring all was secure for the night. It was during these quiet hours that he often learned the most about the true state of affairs at court. Guards talked more freely when they thought no one of importance was listening, and servants shared gossip that revealed more truth than any official report. Tonight, however, the palace seemed unusually subdued. The corridors were darker than usual, with many of the torches left unlit. Marcus found several guard posts unmanned, a serious breach of protocol that would normally result in severe disciplinary action. When he questioned the remaining guards, they claimed to have received orders to reduce their presence, orders supposedly coming from the Queen herself. In the servants' quarters, Marcus found the usual evening bustle replaced by hushed conversations and worried faces. The cook, a jolly woman named Martha who had served the palace for 30 years, pulled him aside as he passed through the kitchen. Captain, she whispered urgently, something terrible is happening. 3 of the kitchen maids were dismissed yesterday without explanation. Good girls they were, never caused any trouble, but they were asking too many questions about the food being prepared for the king's private meals. Marcus felt his blood run cold. What kind of questions? About the herbs being used, the special preparations that only certain people were allowed to handle. Young Sarah noticed that His Majesty seemed more tired and confused after his meals, and she mentioned it to the wrong person. Martha's eyes darted nervously around the kitchen. Sir Thomas was here personally this morning, warning us all about the dangers of spreading rumors. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. If someone was tampering with the king's food, it would explain his increasing frailty, his confusion about kingdom affairs, his growing dependence on the Queen for decision-making. The thought was so treasonous that Marcus could barely allow himself to consider it, but the evidence was mounting. He spent the rest of the night in his quarters, pacing back and forth as he tried to make sense of what he was learning. Queen Isabella had married King Edmund 15 years ago, a political alliance that had brought peace with the neighboring kingdom of Westmarch. She had been the perfect queen in many ways, beautiful, intelligent, charming to visiting dignitaries. But she had always remained somewhat apart from the people of Eldermore, more concerned with court life than with the welfare of common citizens. Sir Thomas's arrival 5 years ago had coincided with subtle changes in palace operations. Loyal servants had been gradually replaced with newcomers, who seemed more loyal to the Queen than to the crown. Key advisors who had served King Edmund faithfully for decades found themselves sidelined in favor of younger men who shared Thomas's calculating demeanor. As dawn approached, Marcus came to a terrible realization. If his suspicions were correct, the Queen and her allies were systematically undermining King Edmund's authority while slowly poisoning him into compliance or incapacity. It was a plot of stunning audacity and careful planning, one that could only succeed because of the trust and love the king bore for his wife. The question now was what Marcus could do about it. As head of the royal guard, his first duty was to protect the king. But how could he protect his sovereign from the very person who shared his bed? Who would believe such accusations against the beloved queen? And if he was wrong, if his suspicions were merely the product of an aging soldier's paranoia, then speaking out would destroy his career and likely result in charges of treason. But as Marcus watched the sun rise over the battlements of Eldermore Palace, he knew he could not remain silent. Whatever the cost to himself, he had sworn an oath to defend the crown and the kingdom. If Queen Isabella was indeed plotting against King Edmund, then Marcus would find a way to expose her treachery, even if it meant sacrificing everything he had worked for throughout his long and faithful service. The game was beginning, and Marcus Blackwood, loyal soldier and protector of the realm, was about to become the most dangerous man in the kingdom. The following weeks passed in a blur of careful observation and growing horror as Marcus began to document the evidence of the conspiracy unfolding within the palace walls. He had served in enough military campaigns to understand the importance of intelligence gathering, and he applied those same skills to uncovering the truth about Queen Isabella's activities. His first breakthrough came through an unlikely source. Eleanor Hartwell, the palace librarian, had always been a quiet presence in the castle. A learned woman in her 50s who had spent most of her life surrounded by ancient texts and historical records. Marcus had never paid her much attention until she approached him one evening in the corridor outside the library. "Captain Blackwood," she said quietly, glancing around to ensure they were alone. "Might I have a word with you privately?" Something in her manner suggested urgency, so Marcus followed her into the vast library, with its towering shelves and rolling ladders. The room smelled of old parchment and leather bindings, and the late evening light filtered through stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on the stone floor. "What troubles you, Miss Hartwell?" Marcus asked, keeping his voice low. Elena moved to a secluded corner where ancient genealogical charts hung on the walls. "I have spent the past several months researching certain historical precedents at Sir Thomas's request. He claimed the Queen was interested in studying past methods of royal succession and the transfer of power during times of royal incapacity." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. "What kind of precedents?" "Regency laws, primarily. The legal mechanisms by which a queen consort can assume ruling authority when a king becomes unable to fulfill his duties due to illness or mental incapacity." Elena's hands trembled slightly as she pulled a thick tome from the shelf. "But more troubling are the requests for information about historical cases of queens who ruled after their husbands' untimely deaths." The book she handed him was bound in dark leather, its pages yellowed with age. The title, written in faded gold lettering, read, "Royal Succession in Times of Crisis, a Historical Analysis." As Marcus flipped through the pages, he saw numerous passages marked with small slips of paper, indicating frequent study. "She had me compile a comprehensive report," Elena continued, "detailing exactly how Queen Marguerite of Thornwick assumed full royal power in 1342 after King Robert's mysterious illness. The parallels to our current situation are disturbing." Marcus studied the marked passages, his military mind automatically noting the strategic implications. Queen Marguerite had systematically isolated King Robert from his advisors, gradually assumed control of the royal treasury, and placed her own supporters in key positions throughout the kingdom. When the king finally died after months of mysterious illness, she had been positioned to claim regency for their young son, effectively making her the ruler of Thornwick. "Miss Hartwell, this research you conducted, do you have copies of what you provided to Sir Thomas?" Elena nodded gravely. "I kept detailed records, as is my habit. But, Captain, there is something else. Yesterday, Sir Thomas visited me again. He asked me to destroy all copies of the research and to forget that the project ever existed. When I hesitated, he made it clear that my position at the palace depended on my cooperation and discretion." The threat was obvious, and Marcus felt a surge of anger at the intimidation of this gentle, scholarly woman. "Miss Hartwell, I need you to know that what you have told me may be of critical importance to the kingdom. Can I trust you to keep copies of your research safe and secret?" "I have already hidden them," she replied with quiet determination. "In my years of studying history, Captain, I have learned to recognize the patterns of tyrants. If Queen Isabella is following the same path as Queen Marguerite, then King Edmund's life may be in immediate danger." That night, Marcus could not sleep. The historical parallel was too precise to be coincidental. Queen Isabella was not acting impulsively or out of sudden ambition. She was following a carefully planned strategy that had succeeded centuries ago in a neighboring kingdom. The thought of such calculated treachery made his stomach turn. He decided to conduct his own investigation into the Queen's background, using his authority as head of the Royal Guard to access normally restricted records. What he discovered in the royal archives sent chills through his entire being. Isabella of Westmarch had not been the first choice for King Edmund's bride. The marriage negotiations had originally involved her older sister, Catherine, who was considered more suitable for the political alliance. But Catherine had died suddenly of a fever just weeks before the wedding was to take place. Isabella had stepped forward as a replacement bride, and the marriage had proceeded as planned. More disturbing was what Marcus found in the intelligence reports from Westmarch. Catherine's death had not been from fever as publicly reported, but from a mysterious illness that bore striking similarities to poisoning. Several other members of the Westmarch court had died under similarly suspicious circumstances in the years leading up to Isabella's marriage to King Edmund. The pattern was clear to anyone willing to see it. Isabella had eliminated obstacles to her own advancement with ruthless efficiency, and now she was applying the same methods to secure ultimate power in Eldermore. Marcus's investigation was complicated by the increasing restrictions on his movements within the palace. Sir Thomas had begun implementing new security protocols that effectively limited the Royal Guard's access to certain areas of the castle. Guard rotations were changed without Marcus's input, and several of his most trusted men were reassigned to duties outside the palace walls. Despite these obstacles, Marcus managed to gather more evidence of the conspiracy. He discovered that the unauthorized taxes being collected throughout the kingdom were being funneled not into the royal treasury, but into private accounts controlled by Queen Isabella and her supporters. The funds were being used to purchase loyalty among key nobles and military commanders, building a network of support that would be crucial when Isabella made her move for ultimate power. The Queen's physician, Dr. Wilhelm Reeds, had become a frequent visitor to the king's chambers, often arriving with special tonics and medications that he claimed would help restore the monarch's strength. But Marcus noticed that King Edmund seemed to grow weaker and more confused after each of these medical visits. One evening, Marcus decided to take a tremendous risk. He concealed himself in an alcove near the king's chambers and waited for Dr. Reeds to arrive with his nightly medication. When the physician knocked on the door, Marcus observed through a crack in the alcove's wooden panel. The scene that unfolded filled him with horror and rage. Dr. Reeds did not enter the king's chambers directly. Instead, he was met in the corridor by Sir Thomas, who took the medication and dismissed the physician with a wave of his hand. Marcus watched as Thomas carefully added a fine powder to the liquid in the bottle, stirring it until it dissolved completely. Only then did Sir Thomas enter the king's chambers, playing the role of the concerned advisor, bringing healing medicine from the royal physician. Marcus remained hidden until both men had departed, his mind reeling with the confirmation of his worst fears. King Edmund was being systematically poisoned, and the very people he trusted most were orchestrating his slow murder. The next morning brought new developments that accelerated the timeline of the conspiracy. Marcus arrived at his usual morning briefing to find Sir Thomas waiting for him with several unfamiliar faces, men who wore the insignia of the Royal Guard but whom Marcus did not recognize. "Captain Blackwood," Sir Thomas said with his characteristic cold smile, "I would like to introduce your new deputy commanders. The Queen has decided that the Royal Guard requires modernization and expansion to meet the evolving needs of the kingdom." The men stepped forward, and Marcus immediately recognized the type: professional soldiers with hard eyes and scarred hands, the kind of men who fought for coin rather than honor. Their leader, a tall man with graying hair and a prominent scar across his left cheek, introduced himself as Colonel Victor Grimm. "Captain Blackwood," Grimm said in a voice like gravel, "I look forward to working with you to enhance the security of the palace. The Queen has expressed particular concern about potential threats to the royal family." The irony of the statement was not lost on Marcus, but he maintained his composure. "Colonel Grimm, I welcome any assistance in protecting their majesties. Perhaps you could brief me on the specific threats that have prompted this expansion. Sir Thomas interjected smoothly. There have been reports of increased activity among certain disloyal elements within the kingdom. Some of the older Guard members may have developed sympathies that compromise their effectiveness. Fresh perspectives and unwavering loyalty are required. The message was clear. Marcus and his longtime companions were being replaced by mercenaries loyal only to Queen Isabella. The coup was entering its final phase, and soon Marcus would find himself powerless to protect King Edmund. That afternoon, Marcus managed to arrange a private meeting with the king in the palace chapel, a location where they were less likely to be observed or overheard. King Edmund arrived looking frailer than ever, his hands shaking as he gripped his walking stick, his eyes clouded with confusion. "Your Majesty," Marcus began carefully, "I have some concerns about your health and the security of the kingdom that I believe require your immediate attention." The king settled into one of the front pews, his breathing labored. "Speak freely, Marcus. Your counsel has always been valuable to me." Marcus chose his words with extreme care, knowing that this might be his only opportunity to warn the king. "I have reason to believe that there are individuals within the palace who may not have your best interests at heart. The new security arrangements, the changes in the guard, the management of kingdom finances, there are patterns that concern me greatly." King Edmund looked up with sudden clarity in his eyes, as if a fog had momentarily lifted. "You suspect treachery, don't you?" "I have felt it too, Marcus, in my clearer moments. There are times when I feel as though I am drowning in a sea of confusion, and I wonder if it is merely age or something more sinister. Your Majesty, if you would permit me to investigate certain irregularities." "No," the king said firmly, though his voice was weak. "If your suspicions are correct, then any overt investigation would only hasten whatever plot is in motion. But Marcus, I need you to know something. Hidden in the altar of this chapel is a sealed document. If anything happens to me, if I should die suddenly or be declared incompetent to rule, you must retrieve that document and ensure it reaches Prince William." Marcus felt his heart race. Prince William was King Edmund's son from his first marriage, currently serving as a military commander in the eastern provinces. The young prince was well loved by the people and the military, but he had been kept away from court for months at Queen Isabella's suggestion. "Your Majesty, what does the document contain?" "My true will," the king whispered, glancing around nervously. "The one that names William as my sole heir and makes provisions to prevent any regency that might circumvent his rightful claim to the throne. Isabella believes the only copy is in the royal vault, where she has access. She does not know about this backup, and it may be the only thing that can save the kingdom from her ambitions." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sir Thomas and Colonel Grimm, who entered the chapel with barely concealed suspicion. "Your Majesty," Sir Thomas said smoothly, "Dr. Reeds is waiting in your chambers with your afternoon medication. It is important that you maintain your schedule for optimal health." As the king was escorted away, Marcus remained in the chapel, ostensibly praying but actually memorizing the details of the altar where the crucial document was hidden. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders like a physical burden. He now held knowledge that could determine the fate of the kingdom, but he also knew that his every move was being watched. That evening, as Marcus made his final rounds, he noticed that several more of his longtime companions among the royal guard had been reassigned or dismissed. The palace was being systematically purged of anyone who might remain loyal to King Edmund rather than to Queen Isabella. Colonel Grimm approached him in the armory, where Marcus was conducting a routine inspection of weapons and equipment. "Captain?" Grimm said casually, running his finger along the edge of a ceremonial sword. "I trust you understand the changing nature of our responsibilities here at the palace." "I serve the crown as I always have," Marcus replied evenly. "Of course, but the crown, you understand, is not always worn by the same head. Wise men recognize when change is inevitable and position themselves accordingly." Grimm's eyes met Marcus's with unmistakable meaning. "The Queen values loyalty above all other virtues. Those who demonstrate absolute devotion to her will find themselves well rewarded when the new order is established." "And those who do not?" Marcus asked. Grimm's smile was cold and predatory. "Let us hope that question never needs to be answered. Good evening, Captain. Sleep well." As Marcus returned to his quarters, he realized that time was running out. The conspiracy was accelerating, and soon he would be forced to make a choice that would determine not only his own fate, but the future of the entire kingdom of Eldermore. The loyal soldier who had served faithfully for 23 years was about to become the most wanted man in the realm. The crisis came sooner than Marcus had anticipated. 3 days after his ominous conversation with Colonel Grimm, he was awakened before dawn by urgent pounding on his chamber door. Outside stood Lieutenant James Morrison, one of the few remaining guards Marcus still trusted, his face pale with distress. "Captain, you must come immediately," Morrison whispered urgently. "His Majesty has collapsed. Dr. Reeds is with him now, but—" He paused, swallowing hard. "It does not look good, sir." Marcus dressed quickly and rushed through the pre-dawn corridors to the king's chambers. A small crowd had already gathered outside the ornate doors. Queen Isabella in a silk nightgown with a velvet robe thrown over her shoulders. Sir Thomas fully dressed despite the early hour. Dr. Reeds moving in and out with medical supplies, and Colonel Grimm standing at attention as if he had been expecting this moment. The scene struck Marcus as carefully orchestrated theater. The Queen's distress seemed genuine enough, but there was something in her eyes that resembled satisfaction more than grief. Sir Thomas appeared to be coordinating the response with military precision, issuing quiet orders to various courtiers and servants who had begun to arrive. "Captain Blackwood," the Queen called out when she noticed his approach. "Thank goodness you are here. The king suffered some kind of seizure during the night. Dr. Reeds believes it may be his heart." Marcus bowed respectfully. "Your Majesty, what can I do to assist?" "Ensure that word of the king's condition does not spread beyond the palace walls until we know more," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. "We cannot afford to create panic among the people." "Of course, Your Majesty. And Prince William, should he not be summoned immediately?" The brief flash of annoyance that crossed the Queen's face confirmed Marcus's suspicions. "Sir Thomas has already sent word to the eastern provinces. However, given the distance and the condition of the roads, it will be several days before the prince can reach the palace. In the meantime, I must assume the burden of governing to ensure the kingdom's stability." Dr. Reeds emerged from the king's chambers at that moment, his face grave with professional concern. "Your Majesty," he announced to the assembled group, "His Majesty's condition is critical. The seizure has left him unconscious, and I fear there may be significant damage to his faculties. Even if he recovers consciousness, he may not be competent to rule." The pronouncement sent a ripple of shocked murmurs through the gathered courtiers, but Marcus noticed that neither the Queen nor Sir Thomas appeared surprised by this development. Their expressions showed appropriate concern, but their eyes held the gleam of anticipated triumph. "Reeds," Marcus said, stepping forward, "might I ask what treatment you are providing for His Majesty?" The physician's eyes flickered nervously toward Sir Thomas before responding. "I am doing everything in my power, Captain. Special medications to support his heart, treatments to reduce the swelling in his brain. But, I must be honest, the king's advanced age and the severity of this episode make his prospects quite grim." Marcus felt sick to his stomach. The doctor's words sounded like a death sentence disguised as medical opinion, and he suspected that the treatments being provided were actually hastening the king's decline rather than promoting his recovery. Over the following days, Marcus watched helplessly as Queen Isabella smoothly assumed increasing control over the kingdom's affairs. She moved with the confidence of someone who had planned for this exact scenario, issuing proclamations in her capacity as regent and making decisions that would typically require the king's direct approval. Sir Thomas proved invaluable in managing the transition, producing legal documents that supported the Queen's authority, and ensuring that key nobles and military commanders fell in line with the new arrangements. Those who showed any hesitation found themselves facing various pressures, financial difficulties, threats to their positions, or in some cases, mysterious accidents that served as warnings to others. Colonel Grimm's mercenary guards had effectively taken control of palace security, gradually replacing Marcus's loyal men with soldiers who answered directly to the Queen. Marcus found his own authority systematically undermined as he was excluded from important meetings and denied access to critical areas of the palace. The king remained unconscious in his chambers, tended by Dr. Reeds and a select group of attendants chosen by the Queen. Marcus was allowed only brief, supervised visits that revealed King Edmund's rapidly deteriorating condition. The once proud monarch had become a shadow of his former self, his face gaunt and pale, his breathing shallow and labored. On the fourth day of the crisis, Marcus finally managed to arrange a private moment with Elena Hartwell. He found her in the library's archives, surrounded by stacks of historical documents, her face drawn with worry and exhaustion. "Miss Hartwell," he said quietly, "I need your help more urgently than ever before." She looked up from her research with eyes that held deep concern. "Captain, I have been studying the precedents more carefully since our last conversation. If the Queen follows the same pattern as Queen Marguerite, the next step will be to have the King declared permanently incapacitated by a council of physicians and nobles. Once that happens, she can claim full regency powers until Prince William comes of age." "But Prince William is already of age," Marcus pointed out. "Not under the laws of regency succession," Elena explained grimly. "Sir Thomas has had me research the specific legal requirements. If a king is incapacitated while his heir is absent from the realm and has not been formally invested with certain ceremonial offices, the queen consort can claim regency until the heir returns and goes through the proper succession rituals. Those rituals can be delayed indefinitely if there are questions about the heir's fitness or loyalty." The diabolical cleverness of the plan became clear to Marcus. Queen Isabella had maneuvered Prince William away from court, then timed the king's illness to occur during his absence. She could now claim legal authority to rule while keeping the prince away under various pretexts, effectively making herself the permanent ruler of Eldermore. "There is something else," Elena continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I have discovered that Sir Thomas has been corresponding secretly with certain foreign powers. I believe Queen Isabella plans to form an alliance with Darkmoor, our traditional enemy. The marriage between kingdoms that was supposed to bring peace may instead be used to facilitate our conquest." The final piece of the puzzle fell into place. Queen Isabella had not simply married King Edmund for personal ambition. She was an agent of a foreign power, sent to weaken Eldermore from within and pave the way for eventual annexation by Darkmoor. The systematic poisoning of the king, the corruption of the royal treasury, the replacement of loyal guards with mercenaries, all of it served the larger purpose of destroying the kingdom's ability to resist invasion. That night, Marcus made his decision. He could no longer wait for proper channels or hope that others would recognize the danger facing the realm. The king's life hung in the balance. Prince William remained ignorant of the conspiracy, and every day of delay brought Queen Isabella closer to absolute power. Using his remaining authority as head of the royal guard, Marcus arranged for a special overnight patrol that would take him through the chapel. In the darkest hour before dawn, he slipped away from his assigned route and entered the sacred space where King Edmund had hidden his true will. The chapel was eerily quiet, lit only by a few flickering candles near the altar. Marcus approached the ornate structure with reverence and determination, running his hands along the carved stone until he found the hidden mechanism the king had described. A section of the altar's base slid away silently, revealing a small compartment that contained a sealed scroll bearing the royal seal. As Marcus carefully extracted the document, he heard the soft sound of footsteps on the chapel's stone floor. He turned to see Colonel Grimm emerging from the shadows, flanked by two of his mercenary soldiers. "Captain Blackwood," Grimm said, with cold amusement. "I had hoped you would prove more sensible than this. The Queen will be disappointed to learn of your treachery." Marcus slipped the royal document inside his tunic and faced the three-armed men with grim determination. "The only treachery here is the conspiracy to murder our rightful king and destroy this kingdom." "Strong words from a man who is about to be charged with theft and treason," Grimm replied, drawing his sword. "Surrender that document, Captain, and perhaps your death will be quick." Instead of surrendering, Marcus drew his own blade with practiced speed. 23 years of military service had honed his skills to a razor's edge, and despite facing 3 opponents, he felt the familiar calm that came with combat. The chapel suddenly erupted into violence as steel rang against steel in the sacred space. Grimm was a skilled swordsman, but Marcus had the advantage of fighting for a cause he believed in with absolute conviction. He parried the colonel's initial thrust and countered with a strike that opened a gash across his opponent's sword arm. The 2 mercenary soldiers pressed their attack from either side, but Marcus used the chapel's architecture to his advantage, positioning himself so that the narrow spaces between the pews limited their ability to coordinate their assault. The battle was brief but fierce. Marcus managed to disable one soldier with a pommel strike to the temple and wounded the other with a cut across the thigh. Colonel Grimm proved more formidable, his experience evident in every calculated move. But Marcus's desperation and superior motivation eventually told. With a final powerful stroke, Marcus disarmed the colonel and held the point of his sword at the man's throat. "You have served the wrong master, Colonel," he said, breathing heavily from exertion. "When Prince William returns to claim his rightful throne, I will ensure he knows of your loyalty to his enemies." Rather than showing fear, Grimm smiled coldly.
"You think you have won something here, Captain?"
"You are one man against an entire conspiracy. Even if you escape the palace, even if you somehow reach Prince William, who will believe your wild accusations against the beloved queen?" Marcus knew the colonel was right about the challenges he faced, but he also knew he had no choice but to try. "Perhaps no one will believe me," he acknowledged, "but I swore an oath to defend this kingdom, and I will honor that oath, regardless of the consequences." He bound and gagged the 3 men using rope from the chapel's bell system, then gathered supplies from various hiding places he had prepared throughout the palace. Years of military planning had taught him the value of contingency preparations, and he had long ago established escape routes and supply caches in case of emergency. As dawn approached, Marcus made his way through the palace's hidden passages, routes he had learned during his years of service, but which the newer guards would not know. He emerged in the stables, where he prepared his fastest horse for the journey ahead. Before departing, Marcus took one last look at Eldermore Palace, the place that had been his home and his life's work for more than 2 decades. The ancient stones held memories of countless loyal servants who had given their lives in defense of the realm, and Marcus wondered if he would ever see those familiar walls again. As he rode out into the gray morning mist, Marcus carried with him the weight of the kingdom's future. The sealed document hidden in his tunic contained King Edmund's true intentions for the succession, but getting it to Prince William would require a dangerous journey through a realm where Queen Isabella's agents would soon be hunting him with deadly intent. Behind him, the palace was already stirring with activity as servants began their daily routines, unaware that a desperate race had begun, a race between a loyal soldier carrying the truth and a conspiracy that threatened to destroy everything the kingdom of Eldermore represented. The die was cast, and Marcus Blackwood was now a fugitive in the very kingdom he had spent his life protecting. Marcus rode hard through the countryside, his horse's hooves thundering across the frost-covered ground as the first light of dawn painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. Behind him, the towers of Eldermore Palace grew smaller with each passing mile, but he knew that Queen Isabella's agents would not be far behind once his escape was discovered. The eastern provinces lay 3 days' ride ahead through treacherous terrain that included dense forests, steep mountain passes, and several river crossings where he would be vulnerable to pursuit. Marcus had chosen this route because it was the most direct path to Prince William's military command, but he also knew it would be the obvious choice for anyone trying to intercept him. As he rode, Marcus's mind raced through the implications of what he had witnessed at the palace. The systematic poisoning of King Edmund, the replacement of loyal guards with foreign mercenaries, the illegal taxation of the provinces. All of it pointed to a conspiracy far more extensive than he had initially imagined. Queen Isabella was not simply seeking personal power. She was preparing to hand over the kingdom of Eldermore to its enemies. His first real test came at the village of Millbrook, a small farming community nestled in a valley between 2 forested hills. As Marcus approached the village inn where he had planned to rest his horse and gather information, he spotted several riders wearing the colors of the Royal Guard, but these were Grimm's men, not soldiers he recognized from his years of service. Marcus quickly guided his mount into the forest beside the road, using the thick undergrowth to conceal his position while he observed the village. The enemy soldiers had clearly arrived recently, and they were questioning the local inhabitants with the aggressive manner of men who expected immediate compliance. Marcus could see the fear in the villagers' faces as they shook their heads repeatedly, obviously denying any knowledge of his whereabouts. A young woman emerged from the inn, gesturing animatedly as she spoke to the lead soldier. Marcus recognized her as Sarah Millwright, the innkeeper's daughter, a spirited girl in her early 20s who had always shown kindness to travelers. The soldier grabbed her roughly by the arm, and Marcus could see her wince with pain as the man shouted questions at her. Every instinct Marcus possessed screamed at him to intervene. to protect the innocent girl from the brutal treatment she was receiving. But he forced himself to remain hidden, knowing that revealing his presence would not only doom his mission, but would likely result in far worse treatment for the villagers once he was captured or killed. After what felt like an eternity, the soldiers remounted their horses and rode away toward the east, following the main road that Marcus had originally planned to take. He waited another hour before emerging from his hiding place, by which time the village had returned to its normal afternoon activities, though an undercurrent of tension remained visible in the way people glanced nervously at the road. Marcus approached the inn cautiously, leading his horse rather than riding to appear less threatening to the already frightened villagers. Sarah Millwright was sweeping the inn's front steps when she noticed his approach, and her face immediately showed recognition and concern. "Captain Blackwood," she said in a hushed voice, "you should not be here. Those soldiers said terrible things about you, claimed you had betrayed the king and stolen from the royal treasury." "Sarah," Marcus replied gently, "I need you to understand that everything those men told you was a lie. I am trying to save the king, not harm him, but I also need to warn you that helping me could put you and your family in danger." The young woman's eyes showed the intelligence and courage that Marcus remembered from his previous visits to the village. "My father always said you were the most honorable man he had ever met, Captain. If you say those soldiers were lying, then I believe you. What can we do to help?" Marcus felt a surge of gratitude for the loyalty of common people who had never forgotten the true meaning of honor and service. "I need a fresh horse and information about the roads ahead." "The soldiers who were here, which direction did they go?" "They took the main eastern road, but they left 2 men behind watching the bridge at Miller's Crossing. They said they expected you to try to reach Prince William, and they intended to stop you." Sarah paused, studying Marcus's face with concern. "Captain, there is another way to the eastern provinces, but it is dangerous. The old mountain trail through Raven's Pass has been closed for years because of rock slides and wolves." "How dangerous?" Marcus asked, already knowing he would take any route that avoided the enemy soldiers. "My brother Thomas used it last year when he was hunting. He said the path is barely visible in places and there are sections where one wrong step could send you over a cliff. But if you can make it through, you would emerge near the eastern garrison without having to cross any of the main roads." Marcus considered his options quickly. The mountain route would be treacherous and would add at least a day to his journey, but it offered the best chance of avoiding Queen Isabella's agents. "Sarah, I will take the mountain trail. Can you provide me with supplies for an extra day's journey?" "Of course, Captain. But there is something else you should know. Thomas saw signs of recent activity in the mountains, campfires, horse tracks. There may be other people using that trail, and not all of them may be friendly to travelers." As Sarah gathered supplies for his journey, Marcus found himself thinking about the broader implications of the conspiracy he was fighting. If Queen Isabella had agents positioned throughout the kingdom, if she had anticipated his escape routes and prepared countermeasures, then the plot was even more sophisticated than he had realized. The inn's stable master, an elderly man named Peter who had served in the royal army during his youth, approached Marcus as he prepared to depart. "Captain," the old soldier said quietly, "I recognized those men who were here earlier. Mercenaries, not true soldiers of Eldermore." Their accents were foreign, probably from Darkmoor or one of the northern kingdoms. This information confirmed Marcus's suspicions about the international nature of the conspiracy. Queen Isabella was not working alone. She had the backing of foreign powers who stood to benefit from Eldermore's internal collapse. "Peter," Marcus said, "if other travelers come this way asking about me, tell them nothing. But if Prince William himself should pass through this village, you must find a way to warn him that his life is in danger and that he cannot trust anyone from the palace except those he knew before his father became ill." The old soldier nodded grimly. "I understand, Captain. May the gods protect you on your journey." As evening approached, Marcus began his ascent into the mountains along a trail that was barely more than a deer path winding through dense pine forests. The temperature dropped rapidly as he climbed higher, and soon his breath was visible in the cold mountain air. The night passed in a series of challenges that tested both Marcus's endurance and his horsemanship. The trail was treacherous in the darkness, with loose rocks that could easily cause a horse to stumble, and sections where the path seemed to disappear entirely. Several times, Marcus was forced to dismount and lead his horse carefully around obstacles or across narrow ledges where a single misstep would result in a fatal fall. As dawn broke over the mountain peaks, Marcus found himself at a small clearing where he could rest his exhausted horse and assess his position. The view from this height was spectacular, with the entire kingdom spread out below him like a detailed map. In the distance, he could see the spires of Eldermore Palace, and beyond that, the smoke from countless villages and towns going about their daily business, unaware of the crisis threatening their peaceful lives. It was while studying this vista that Marcus noticed something that sent a chill through his bones. Rising from several points throughout the kingdom were columns of black smoke, not the usual gray smoke from cooking fires or workshops, but the thick, dark smoke that came from burning buildings. As he watched, more columns appeared, suggesting that fires were being set systematically across the realm. The implications were terrifying. Either the kingdom was under attack from external enemies, or Queen Isabella was implementing a scorched earth policy to eliminate potential opposition to her rule. Either way, the people of Eldermore were suffering while Marcus struggled to reach Prince William with the evidence that could save them. His contemplation was interrupted by the sound of horses approaching from below on the mountain trail. Marcus quickly led his mount deeper into the forest and found a position where he could observe the trail without being seen. Soon, a group of riders came into view. 5 men wearing dark clothing and carrying weapons that marked them as professional killers rather than soldiers. Marcus recognized the leader as one of Sir Thomas's associates, a man named Captain Rex Vorthak, who had arrived at the palace several months ago, claiming to be a military advisor from a friendly neighboring kingdom. In reality, Marcus now realized Vorthak was probably an assassin sent to eliminate anyone who might threaten the conspiracy. The group paused at the clearing where Marcus had recently rested, and Vorthak dismounted to examine the ground carefully. Even from his concealed position, Marcus could see the man's expertise as he read the signs of recent passage, hoof prints, broken branches, disturbed earth. "He came this way," Vorthak announced to his companions. "No more than an hour ahead of us. The trail narrows from here so he cannot move as quickly. We will have him before he reaches the eastern pass." Marcus realized that his pursuers were more skilled than he had anticipated. They had somehow determined his route and were closing the gap between them with methodical precision. The mountain trail that he had hoped would provide safety had instead become a trap, with steep cliffs on both sides preventing any possibility of changing direction. As the assassins resumed their pursuit, Marcus found himself facing a terrible choice. He could continue ahead and hope to maintain his lead, but the narrowing trail would eventually force a confrontation under circumstances that favored his pursuers. Alternatively, he could attempt to double back and find an alternative route, but that would cost precious time and might allow the enemy to cut off his escape entirely. The decision was made for him when he rounded a bend in the trail and found himself facing a massive rock slide that had completely blocked the path ahead. Tons of stone and debris had cascaded down from the cliff face above, creating an impassable barrier that stretched for hundreds of yards. Marcus stared at the obstacle with growing despair, realizing that he had ridden into a dead end with determined killers closing in behind him. The trail was too narrow to turn his horse around, and the cliffs on either side offered no possibility of escape. As he heard the sound of his pursuers approaching from below, Marcus made a decision that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. He dismounted and began examining the rock slide carefully, looking for any gap or passage that might allow him to continue on foot. His horse would have to be abandoned, but the sealed document containing King Edmund's true will was more important than any consideration of personal survival. Near the top of the debris pile, Marcus spotted a narrow opening between 2 large boulders that might be wide enough for a man to squeeze through. It was a desperate gamble. If the gap proved too narrow, or if it led nowhere, he would be trapped when his pursuers arrived. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder as Marcus began climbing the treacherous pile of loose rock and stone. Behind him, he could hear voices as the assassins reached the clearing and discovered his abandoned horse. Their shouts of triumph quickly turned to confusion as they realized their quarry had vanished. "Find him!" Vorthak's voice echoed off the mountain walls. "He cannot have gone far on foot. Search every crevice, every shadow. The queen wants him dead, and we will not return to face her disappointment." Marcus squeezed through the gap between the boulders just as arrows began whistling through the air around him. The assassins had spotted his movement and were attempting to bring him down before he could escape. One arrow struck the rock inches from his head, sending stone chips flying into his face. On the other side of the rock slide, Marcus found himself on a precarious ledge that ran along the cliff face toward what appeared to be another section of the mountain trail. The ledge was barely 2 feet wide, with a sheer drop of several hundred feet on one side and solid rock on the other. Moving carefully, Marcus began working his way along the ledge, pressing his back against the cliff face and sliding his feet forward, one step at a time. Behind him, he could hear his pursuers shouting in frustration as they realized they could not follow him through the narrow gap while wearing armor and carrying weapons. The ledge seemed to stretch on forever, and several times Marcus felt the stone crumble slightly under his weight, sending pebbles cascading into the void below. His military training had not prepared him for this type of high-altitude survival, and he fought against the vertigo that threatened to overwhelm him as he looked down at the forest floor far below. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Marcus reached a section where the ledge widened and connected to another mountain trail. This path appeared to lead downward toward the eastern valleys, though it was even more primitive than the route he had been following. As he began his descent, Marcus realized that he had escaped immediate pursuit, but had lost his horse, most of his supplies, and valuable time. The sun was now high overhead, indicating that he had used most of the day in his mountain crossing. Prince William's garrison was still many miles away, and Queen Isabella's agents would be spreading throughout the kingdom with orders to kill him on sight. But Marcus pressed on, driven by the knowledge that the sealed document he carried might be the kingdom's only hope for salvation. The loyal soldier who had once enjoyed the respect and comfort of palace life was now a desperate fugitive, racing against time to prevent the destruction of everything he had spent his life defending. Marcus emerged from the mountain wilderness as the sun began to set on his second day of desperate flight from the palace. His clothes were torn from passage through thorny underbrush, his boots were worn thin from scrambling over rocky terrain, and exhaustion weighed on his shoulders like a physical burden. But the sealed document remained safely hidden within his tunic, and the eastern garrison was finally visible in the distance. The fortress of Ironhold stood on a strategic hill overlooking the confluence of 2 rivers, its massive stone walls and tall watchtowers designed to guard the kingdom's eastern border against invasion. Marcus had visited the garrison many times during his years of service, and he knew that Prince William commanded the loyalty of some of Eldermore's finest soldiers. If anyone could be trusted to hear the truth and act upon it, it would be the rightful heir to the throne. As Marcus approached the outer perimeter of the garrison, he was challenged by sentries who initially did not recognize the bedraggled figure limping toward their posts. Only when he came closer did Sergeant William Thorne, a veteran soldier who had served under Marcus years earlier, identify his former captain. "By all the saints," Thorne exclaimed, "Captain Blackwood, what has happened to you?" "You look like you've been fighting bears in the wilderness." "Sergeant," Marcus replied wearily, "I need to see Prince William immediately. I carry urgent news from the capital that cannot wait." Thorne's expression grew serious as he noted the desperate urgency in Marcus's voice. "The prince is in his private quarters reviewing reports from the border scouts. I will escort you there directly, Captain." As they walked through the garrison's courtyard, Marcus was heartened by the familiar sights and sounds of a well-run military installation. Soldiers went about their duties with the disciplined efficiency that marked professional troops. Weapons and equipment were maintained in perfect condition, and the overall atmosphere spoke of high morale and strong leadership. Prince William received Marcus in his study, a sparse room furnished with military maps, tactical manuals, and reports from across the eastern provinces. The prince was now 28 years old, tall and athletic, with the same intelligent brown eyes as his father. He had inherited King Edmund's sense of honor and duty, but he also possessed the energy and decisiveness of youth. "Captain Blackwood," Prince William said warmly, rising from behind his desk to clasp Marcus's hand. "This is an unexpected pleasure. I trust all is well at the palace?" The simple question hit Marcus like a physical blow, reminding him of the terrible news he carried. "Your Highness," he began carefully, "I bring grave tidings that will shock and grieve you. Your father has been gravely ill, and I fear there are those at court who do not have his best interests at heart." Prince William's expression immediately grew serious. "Speak plainly, Marcus. What has happened?" Over the next hour, Marcus related everything he had discovered about the conspiracy against King Edmund. He described the systematic poisoning, the replacement of loyal guards with foreign mercenaries, the illegal taxation of the provinces, and Queen Isabella's apparent alliance with external enemies. As he spoke, he watched Prince William's face transform from initial disbelief to growing anger and finally to cold determination. When Marcus finished his account by producing the sealed document from the chapel, Prince William examined it carefully before breaking the royal seal. As he read his father's true will, his jaw tightened with controlled fury. "So she would steal my birthright while murdering my father," the prince said quietly, his voice carrying the promise of retribution. "And Sir Thomas, whom I trusted as an advisor, is her primary accomplice in this treachery." "Your Highness," Marcus continued, "there is more. I believe Queen Isabella is preparing to surrender the kingdom to Dartmoor, or another enemy power. The fires I saw burning across the realm, the foreign mercenaries, the systematic weakening of our defenses, all of it points to preparations for invasion and occupation." Prince William stood and moved to a large map of the kingdom mounted on his study wall. "How much time do we have before she can consolidate her power completely?" "Not long, Your Highness. By now she will have had me declared a traitor and fugitive. She may also have announced your father's death and claimed regency in your absence. Every day we delay gives her conspiracy more time to take root." The prince studied the map intently, his military training evident in the way he analyzed the strategic situation. "We have perhaps 800 loyal troops here at Ironhold, plus another 300 scattered among the border outposts. But Isabella controls the capital and the central provinces. If she has foreign backing, she may command significantly greater numbers." Marcus moved to stand beside the prince at the map. "Your Highness, we do not need to defeat her entire army. We need to expose her treachery to the people of the kingdom. Most of the nobles and common folk still believe in the rightful succession. If they learn the truth about what has happened to the king, many will rally to your cause. And how do you propose we spread this truth throughout the kingdom when Isabella controls the royal messengers and has declared you a wanted man?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Sergeant Thorne, who had been standing guard at the door, cleared his throat respectfully. "Your Highness, if I may suggest, there are networks of veterans throughout the kingdom, men who served under Captain Blackwood and other honorable officers. They meet regularly in taverns and village squares, sharing news and maintaining old friendships. If the word were spread through these informal channels," Prince William's eyes lit up with understanding. "The veterans would carry the message to every corner of the realm within days, and common people trust their judgment more than official proclamations." "Exactly, Your Highness," Marcus agreed. "But we must act quickly. Every hour that passes allows Isabella to strengthen her position." The prince made his decision with the swift certainty of a born leader. "Captain Blackwood, I am placing you in command of a special mission to coordinate communication with the veteran networks throughout the kingdom. Sergeant Thorne will accompany you with a select team of our most trusted messengers. And you, Your Highness, what will you do?" "I will lead the main force toward the capital, gathering loyal troops from the provincial garrisons as we advance. If Isabella wants a war for the throne, then she shall have one. But I intend to end this conflict quickly, before it can tear the kingdom apart." Over the next several hours, the garrison transformed into a hive of activity as Prince William's plan took shape. Trusted messengers were dispatched to loyal commanders throughout the eastern provinces, carrying sealed orders to mobilize their forces and march toward the capital. Supply trains were organized to support the advancing army, and scouts were sent ahead to gather intelligence about enemy positions and movements. Marcus found himself once again wearing the uniform of a captain in the royal army, though now he served Prince William rather than the corrupted regime that had taken control of the palace. The weight of responsibility was enormous. The success or failure of their cause might depend on his ability to rally the common people of Eldermoor to support their rightful prince. As dawn approached, Marcus prepared to depart on his mission with a small team of the garrison's most experienced soldiers. Prince William accompanied him to the stables where their horses were being saddled for the journey ahead. "Marcus," the prince said quietly, "I want you to know that what you have done, the risk you have taken, the courage you have shown, will not be forgotten. You could have remained silent and safe, but you chose to fight for what is right. "Your Highness," Marcus replied, "I swore an oath many years ago to defend this kingdom. That oath does not become void simply because the threats come from within rather than without." The two men clasped hands in the manner of soldiers facing a dangerous campaign together. Then Marcus mounted his horse and led his small team out into the pre-dawn darkness. Beginning A.